Welcome to Allie and Christian Code, the show where passion meets expertise in the world of software engineering. I'm Allie, a former healthcare provider turned software developer.
And I'm Christian, an experienced software engineer. We are here to share our learnings together as we find collaboration is better than going alone. Today, we're going to take a look at how we might iterate through working on a problem, how we can start from one area, get it better, and then recognize that we want to keep going and build upon what we've started. On this page, I have a 9 by 9 grid with a bunch of numbers between 1 and 9 as well. This is a completed Sudoku puzzle. And what I want to have us do is build some tools around this to change how this is presented. We can see that we just have a large group of numbers. We don't have like the normal lines
Nice
within the
little
table.
boxes.
But what I want to have is to add with these buttons the ability to put an overlay onto the table, one that would be what you see here, completely clear, one that would be a full table blur, one that would blur out everything except one corner so that you could focus in on that aspect of
Yep.
the puzzle,
Mhm.
one for a row and one for a column.
Like when you do a real Sudoku puzzle, you have to cover up
Exactly.
all the other sides.
Isolate, focus in, move around, and
Exactly.
be able to discover what's working and what's
Mhm.
not, or how you can leverage that to find the solution to the next step.
Absolutely.
If I come over to our code that is driving this, we have a table that is doing some loops per row and per column.
Mhm.
And then that shows the numbers from this number grid, which is a multi-dimensional array that is set up to look like it renders, which is something that I appreciate here because this could be done differently and it would be much harder to understand what's here if
Yep.
you were trying to map this to what the end user sees. Step one will, let's look at adding the subgrouping widths and borders. So
A
within
little
this
bit of
group
styling.
of three, we should have some here and we should have some there.
Mhm.
We should be able to do additions of a class
Mhm.
here. And we should be able to look at our style sheet. This is currently set up for the table
Mhm.
and the cell and the
Run the whole
buttons.
thing.
We've went ahead and defined our sticker border class,
Mhm.
and we want to give it a border of 3. Let's do 4 actually. And now we've started by adding that directly onto each cell,
Mhm.
which we're going to double check that this works by rerunning the site and
I feel like it's
refreshing the
gonna be a
page.
lot.
And
There
there
we
you go.
go.
And it's thicker. It's on
Mhm.
everything. But we proved that we've got that part wired up,
Yes.
which is a step we might skip, assuming it's going to work and get surprised by later. If we were to think about what this should look like, we really don't want all of these to be this thick, obviously.
No.
We want to have column 3 here
Mhm.
have a right side border.
Yep.
We want column 6 to have a right side border,
Yep.
but we don't want the other columns to have a thicker right side border.
Correct.
How might we go about indicating that?
While we are looping through, we can always track our index to see what's going on there, where we're at.
Excellent idea. Let's look at, instead of defining our class through this way,
Mm-hmm.
let's see about adding our class another way. We're going to define a method that we're calling border
Mm-hmm.
classes. We will pass in our indexes.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have that return something different. Okay.
Perfect. And that I and J is tracking the index of both the column and the row as we go through each of those loops.
Good call out. Let's go ahead and name those accordingly here.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps even up here. Right. This could be our row.
Yep.
This could be our column. We can modify that accordingly to be more clear as to what those values are providing us
Mm-hmm.
and where.
Make it a little easier on yourself to track those changes and any future dev that comes along to look at your work.
Yep, absolutely. As I started this, I went I, J, doesn't matter, it'll be fine. But now that we're starting to use it, it becomes a little clearer that that's going to get complicated or lost,
Mm-hmm.
confused, especially I and J look very similar already.
Yes.
This is one way to think about doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, even though we are passing in row and not using it, I would try to see that this makes an impact. In fact, I might even change this to be no border theme, as it
Make
should
it really
still,
drastic.
exactly. I want to make it
Mm-hmm.
very clear what we're doing made the impact I expect.
Yep.
So that tells us we're off by one.
Yep. Why? Because our index starts at 0.
Off by one errors always get you. And since we're looking at that, we also saw
It was the full
that
box.
it's doing the whole box, where we're
Mm-hmm.
at the moment just trying to go for the column. Well, let's
Just
go
that
change
side
this
border. Mm-hmm.
border right
Much more
side
clear.
border,
There we go.
rerun, reload.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
That
that's
looks
looking better.
better.
That's looking better.
Look at that.
Okay, we can now tell that we've got a bit of a thicker border where we wanted
Yep.
it there.
Yep.
Our code is telling us a bit more explicitly what's happening here and
Mm-hmm.
how that's working. We also did it in a couple of steps to learn and go to fixing as we went versus trying to solve it all up front and assuming it would be perfect the first time we ran it.
Yep. And retesting after every change to see what you've got.
So now we are interested in the rows and
Mm-hmm.
same idea. So surely we can do something as easy as changing this to row
Absolutely.
and
Mm-hmm.
row and bottom
Yes.
border. And we'll touch that change. And we see that we have our columns working well and our rows mostly working.
Kind of. Looks like our right border is overriding our bottom border.
Let's talk through what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this method helping us choose the right style. we come into here and we first check about our columns. And
Hmm.
when it's a match, we immediately return.
And check
So
nothing else.
we never get to this next spot. So we could potentially change these returns
Hmm.
and combine them as two classes on this method return.
Hmm.
Or we could
Just
create a
return a
new
string.
class just for that scenario
Hmm.
and adjust. I think in this case, combining them feels nice.
I think so too.
So if we were to create a new list of strings,
Hmm.
we can then add the
Got it.
classes we've got when the rules we already know are
Hmm.
working. And then when we're done, we can return a combination
Hmm.
of those
Of our list.
with a space so that it will render in the browser these as two separate classes. So there's a few different ways we could have done that. This way works.
Hmm.
There's different ways we could have considered the logic here as well. We could have used mod instead of equals, where you could have said like mod 3 has a remainder of 1 or 2
Hmm.
and gone that route.
Yep.
For now, for where we're at, I think these are working well and
Hmm.
hopefully, presumably make sense. Let's take a look in the browser. If we were to inspect this column,
What that class looks like.
we see here that it is combining both classes with a
Hmm.
space. What do we want to tackle next?
Let's do one of the overlays.
Okay, so we have our methods available for us so that we
Hmm.
can already be connected to the quick events. We have a method for defining our border classes. We have our
Hmm.
grids. Let's also look at adding an at overlay
Yes.
classes with the same parameters.
Hmm.
Given our previous experience, I'm going to assume that we're going to keep the same list concept and join concept. We can have this method. Let's do for now a new, I'm going to do that. I'll have this method uh, add our selected overlay.
Hmm.
We'll have clear set it back to an empty string,
Yep.
and we'll choose full, setting to full
Blur it or
overlay.
okay.
Not filter of blur.
Hmm.
20 sounds great. In theory, this will run and add whatever value is there.
Hmm.
When we clicked clear or when we start up, it should be nothing.
Hmm.
And when we click full, it should add the full overlay style.
Yes.
It should blur the
The
backdrop of
entire
that
grid.
cell,
Hmm.
which should impact the entire grid. That's interesting. It
So blur
definitely
the
did some
background,
things.
but it didn't blur the number with the value in that data
Yep.
cell.
but it did some things. Interesting to me, it looks like each cell is a little different in and of itself. And then, yeah,
Depending on the
we
border.
also have some very interesting borders happening. There's
Yeah,
an interesting one.
at
Okay.
some different spots.
We missed the saturation to give it the over the text side of things. And then we want to go ahead and change the color of the text behind it so that we can see how that is impacted.
Mm-hmm.
I like to choose red because it's easier to write or easier to type. Okay,
Mm.
again, we've got some additional
Still got some
changes,
borders.
but
Mm-hmm.
we're still getting the text through.
Yes.
We can use the RGBA with A being alpha, and the alpha channel will allow it to be transparent. It'll change how it displays clarity-wise for the color. So this
Mm.
might be where we'll actually see the numbers go blurry.
That value change. Mm.
Okay,
Back start.
there we go. That's
Okay.
a little closer. It
Mm-hmm.
definitely faded those numbers a bit. We can still
Quite a
see
bit.
them, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to kind of really squint to see
Yes.
it. So that's good.
Mm-hmm.
What do you suppose is going on with the borders?
I don't know. It's very odd in weird spots that I don't think that we've um, adjusted.
What adjustment should we do?
Border zero. Get rid of
Border
all the
zero.
borders.
Get rid of all the borders. Seems reasonable. Try that out.
Reset. There we go.
Okay. Now our borders are gone
Mm-hmm.
from this view. If we hit clear, we come
Do they
back to
all
where
come
we
back?
were with
Yeah.
those thicker borders around the important sections. Good.
Well, we've got the whole overlay and the whole clear. Can we isolate that to just a certain section?
Yeah. Let's jump to doing a row first.
Okay.
What do we want our row overlay to work differently? Maybe we can give it a background color of red so that we can see that it gets applied.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have full, we have row. Definitely got our red there. That's good.
Very red.
But I think we've hit a spot where this approach is not going to continue to work for what we're looking
Mm-hmm.
for.
Yep.
So we probably need to think about how are we going to specify which row is different
Mm-hmm.
than the others
Yep.
and what we can utilize to modify that. So previously we were doing some math in our border classes.
Mm-hmm.
And in our overlay class, we aren't
We
currently
did
doing
none.
anything related to
Mm-hmm.
that. Actually, let's go with if selected overlay equals row overlay, and then inside of that, if row equals to. So if we selected row, then we're gonna check to see if we're on row number 2. Well,
Mm-hmm.
actually, no, row number 3 because of our 0 index. When it is row 3, we will apply our red coloring.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we'll use the gray coloring. And if it's anything other than row, then we can let it be whatever has been selected by the other buttons.
Okay.
I would expect with these changes, we can get into the row having a single row be red and the rest being gray.
Mhm.
And that does indeed work.
Mhm.
However, that's going to get difficult and is probably not the greatest way to go about doing that. Um, I also want to think about like, is that the best way to show this row? Or might that row actually want to be clear?
Probably want to be clear.
Yeah. Let's go make some other changes.
All right.
Rather than full overlay and row overlay,
Mhm.
we can try rename this one to blur, since that's really what we're doing with it.
Mhm.
And let's go ahead and make a clear class, although it's not going to do anything for us right now. Maybe it will in the future.
Mhm. But for now, make sure that blur does not get applied.
Exactly. We'll make this blur. We can leave this as row overlay for now. We'll change this to blur, and we'll change this instead to clear.
Clear. There
That
we
looks
go.
a little nicer. That
What
might
you
be
would more
more
expect
helpful for
if
what
you
we're
just want to
aiming
look at
at.
a row.
All right. But that's still going to be pretty hard to maintain. And this is going to be very likely to change a lot. When we're talking about overlays and we know that we're eventually going to want to do a corner and a column and who knows what other ways we might want to
Yeah.
go and hide information,
Mhm.
we probably want to come up with a better approach than um, equalities on those.
Hard coding in a specific row.
Exactly. Exactly. Really like the way that this flows to look
Mhm.
like the grid on the screen.
Mhm.
So what I want to do is copy that and use that for our styles. Let's call that overlay grid. And let's change all of these to blur. And now let's use, instead of overlay classes here, we can use our
So good.
overlay grid, just like we are using the number grid.
Mhm.
Okay. We've come in, everything is blurred. None of our buttons are doing anything at the moment because we're not modifying that grid, but we did get it to show that. So let's
Mhm.
change one of these clear and try again. And there we see we got the single
Mhm.
cell that we changed now clear. And this feels to me much more like something we can do something with. That still is a little verbose in terms of comparing it to the grid, depending upon
Yeah.
what other names we might describe.
Mhm. Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is, for our default, we're going to empty all of these out. I'm also going to change the name of our blur class to just B, just the letter B. And that way we can take this and we can go into our set full,
Mm-hmm.
and we can change all
And
of
set
these
that.
to the letter B. Oops.
Mm-hmm.
And we can take what we've got there and we can put
Mm-hmm.
that into our overlay line. And instead of B, we can use C for clear. It's kind of interesting because we started with our row and our column labeled as I and J. We
Mm-hmm.
decided to go away from that for clarity's sake. Here, I've opted to convert something that was more clear in the class name of
Mm-hmm.
blur and clear to single digit characters of B and C because it is clearer for me to read this in my code
Mm-hmm.
than it would be if all of those other letters were
Or a
there.
forward. Mm-hmm.
And to compare this to my numbers as well.
Mm-hmm.
Start off with a clear view.
Mm-hmm.
I can blur everything. I can do a row.
Nice.
You can see how we can take that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need this any longer. And we can make these other methods
Mm-hmm.
following this pattern very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this one's going to be clears in the upper corner and blurs elsewhere. And this one will do the second column and make sure to blur the row. Starting clear, full, corner, row, column, clear.
Love it.
We got a working thing in the website, but more
Mm-hmm.
importantly, we've got a more maintainable part of our code because we can more easily read it, because we will be able to understand, and future developers would be able to understand what this is doing and when something needs changed, how to change it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Good established pattern that we discovered by iterating and problem solving as we went.
Absolutely. Taking those beats in between steps to go, this doesn't feel like it's going to work great going
Yeah.
forward. I know
Yeah.
where we want to get to. We could force our way through this way. Let's
Mm-hmm.
pause a little bit and think about how we can make it easier for ourselves in the future.
Mm-hmm.